The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless snow as Lydia Hayes gripped the steering wheel of her ancient Ford pickup. The 23-year-old paramedic squinted through the white darkness, her 12-hour shift at Pinewood Memorial Hospital finally over, home just 5 miles away through the worst blizzard Montana had seen in decades. She almost missed it, the glint of metal where metal shouldn't be, headlights pointing at an unnatural angle down the ravine off Route 16. Lydia's training kicked in before her common sense could object. She was already pulling over, grabbing her emergency kit from the passenger seat. The cold hit her like a physical blow, the wind stealing her breath as she stumbled through knee-deep snow toward the wreckage. A black Bentley lay crumpled against a pine tree, its hood accordion folded around the trunk, steam hissing into ice crystals in the freezing air. Blood streaked the shattered driver's window, a crimson trail leading away from the car and disappearing into the swirling snow. Lydia followed it, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly, heart hammering against her ribs as the implications sank in. Someone had survived the crash and was now wandering injured in lethal cold. She found him collapsed beneath a snow-laden pine, barely conscious in a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. Blood soaked his left side, and when Lydia gently turned him over, she found 2 distinct wounds that her experienced eye immediately recognized. Gunshot, not crash injuries. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused with pain. A gold signet ring glinted on his hand as he weakly tried to reach inside his jacket, mumbling something that sounded like Francesco, before his arm fell limp again. Lydia knew she should call this in. Gunshot wounds meant police involvement, but the nearest help was at least 40 minutes away in this weather. With the temperature plummeting and his blood pressure dropping fast, this man had minutes, not hours. "I'm going to help you," she told him, already cutting away his shirt with medical shears, revealing a torso mapped with scars that told stories of a violent past. 2 fresh wounds oozed steadily, one through his shoulder, another lodged in his side. With practiced efficiency, Lydia packed the wounds with gauze from her kit, applied pressure bandages, and wrapped her own coat around his shivering form. The stranger was tall and solid with muscle. Getting him to her truck would be nearly impossible alone, but leaving him meant certain death. Adrenaline and determination fueled her as she half-dragged, half-carried him up the steep embankment, her boots slipping on hidden ice beneath the fresh powder. Twice they nearly went tumbling back down, the man's weight threatening to pull them both into the ravine. When she finally managed to haul him into her truck's cab, Lydia was drenched in sweat, despite the freezing temperature. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling names and fragments that sounded like warnings. Ambush and traitor, among the few words she could make out. The 3-mile drive to her isolated cabin took 20 agonizing minutes through the worsening blizzard, the truck's wheels spinning for purchase on the unplowed road. All the while, Lydia kept glancing at her passenger, watching his breathing grow more labored, knowing that every second counted in the race between life and death playing out beside her. Lydia's cabin appeared through the whiteout like a mirage, a small cedar structure with smoke curling from the chimney thanks to the self-lighting stove she'd splurged on last winter. She pulled as close to the porch as possible, killed the engine, and faced her next challenge, getting a man twice her size inside. Her living room transformed into a makeshift trauma center as she cleared the coffee table with one sweep of her arm, medical textbooks and mugs crashing to the floor. The stranger lay unconscious now, his skin waxy and cold to the touch as she cut away his ruined suit. The wounds were worse than she'd initially assessed. The shoulder had gone clean through but was still bleeding freely. The side wound had a bullet lodged against a rib, the surrounding tissue already showing signs of infection. Lydia worked with desperate focus, her training at the understaffed rural hospital having prepared her for emergencies most paramedics never faced. Using tweezers sterilized in the flame of her gas stove, Lydia extracted the bullet, dropping the misshapen metal into a bowl with a clink that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin. The man didn't flinch, a bad sign that shock was setting in fast. She ran IV fluids warmed against the fireplace, stitched both wounds with the steady hands that had earned her the nickname Surgeon among her colleagues, and wrapped him in every blanket she owned. The fever hit just after midnight, his body finally fighting back against trauma and exposure. Through the long night, Lydia monitored his vitals, changed cooling compresses, and listened to fragments of delirium that painted a disturbing picture. "Francesco betrayed us," he muttered at one point, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes open but unseeing. The shipment, family meeting, trap, at 3 a.m. and she found a wallet in his shredded suit jacket, genuine alligator leather holding no ID, just a stack of $100 bills, and a single business card for Westlake Imports with a Boston phone number. The gun holster under his arm had been empty, but the shoulder rig was custom-made, expensive, meant for someone who regularly carried a weapon. Dawn approached with howling winds rattling the cabin windows, the blizzard showing no signs of abating, as Lydia dozed in the armchair beside her patient. She woke with a start to find him watching her, his dark eyes clear and alert for the first time, calculating in a way that sent ice through her veins. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, but controlled, the accent faintly Italian beneath cultivated American tones. He didn't attempt to move, just assessed her with the gaze of someone cataloging threats and exits. "Lydia Hayes. I'm a paramedic," she answered, professional instincts overriding the sudden apprehension. "I found you in a wrecked Bentley off Route 16 last night. You've been shot twice and have moderate hypothermia." The man absorbed this information with an unsettling calm, then attempted to sit up, immediately falling back with a grimace that betrayed his pain, despite obvious efforts to conceal it. "My phone. I need to make a call." "Your phone was smashed in the crash. And you're not calling anyone until your fever breaks, and I know you won't bleed out the moment you move," Lydia replied, with the firm tone she used on non-compliant patients. "Now, maybe you could tell me your name and why someone used you for target practice." For a long moment, the stranger stared at Lydia, his expression unreadable before he finally answered, "Dante Blackwell." The name rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, yet something in his delivery suggested it might not be real. Lydia didn't push. His identity mattered less than his survival right now. She checked his bandages, noting with relief that the bleeding had mostly stopped, though infection remained a serious concern in the shoulder wound. Snow continued to fall throughout the morning, radio reports warning that roads would remain impassable for at least 3 days as the storm system stalled over the mountains. Lydia tried not to think about what that meant. 3 days trapped with a mysterious gunshot victim who clearly had dangerous connections. By noon, Dante's fever had broken enough for him to sit up and take broth, his movements careful but precise as he assessed every corner of her modest cabin. His eyes lingered on escape routes, defensible positions, vulnerabilities, a soldier's evaluation that made Lydia increasingly uneasy. "You should have left me," he said suddenly while she changed his bandages. "Taking me in was dangerous." His tone wasn't threatening but matter of fact, as if stating an obvious truth she'd overlooked. Lydia met his gaze steadily as she applied fresh antiseptic to the angry red flesh around his stitches. "I'm a paramedic. We don't leave people to die in snowstorms, regardless of their circumstances." The distant sound of engines broke the silence that followed. Not one vehicle, but many, their combined growl growing louder as they approached the isolated cabin. Dante's entire demeanor changed in an instant, tension coiling through his body as he struggled to stand. "Get away from the windows!" he ordered, voice sharp with urgency. "Now!" He stumbled toward her bedroom, one hand pressed against his wounded side, leaving Lydia frozen in confusion. She moved to the front window just as the first vehicle came into view, a black Escalade with tinted windows, followed by another, then 5 more, then too many to count. They poured into the clearing around her cabin like a funeral procession, their sleek forms incongruous against the rural Montana wilderness. Men in dark suits and tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, weapons visible at their sides as they formed a perimeter around her property. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs as she counted. 20, 30, 40 SUVs, still arriving, their headlights cutting through the falling snow. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. When she didn't immediately answer, it came again, more insistent. With trembling fingers, Lydia opened it to find a broad-shouldered man with a military-style haircut and an earpiece, his expression professionally blank. "Ms. Hayes?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew her identity. "We need to speak with Mr. Blackwell. It's urgent." The cabin transformed within hours, her kitchen table covered with laptops and encrypted phones, her living room filled with armed men who moved with military precision. Dante sat at the center of it all, pale but commanding, issuing orders that were obeyed without question. Lydia learned the truth in fragments, each revelation more shocking than the last. Dante Blackwell was no ordinary criminal, but the head of one of the most powerful syndicates on the East Coast, currently involved in a dangerous transition toward legitimate business operations. "The old guard doesn't approve of my methods," he explained quietly when they finally had a moment alone. "Traditionalists like Francesco believe we should stick to what's always worked. Intimidation, territory, blood debts. The attempted assassination had been timed perfectly. Dante's isolated trip to Montana to meet with legitimate investors, minimal security, a storm approaching to complicate any rescue efforts. Only the crash had saved him, throwing him clear of the car before his attackers could confirm the kill. Lydia felt like she'd stepped into another reality. Her peaceful cabin now command central for what appeared to be a small army. "How long will this last?" she asked, gesturing at the men stationed at every window. "Until the traitor is found," Dante answered, watching her with those calculating eyes that seemed to see everything. "You saved the wrong man, Lydia Hayes. Now you're a loose end in someone else's cleanup operation." She noticed the subtle hierarchies among Dante's men, those who approached him directly versus those who waited to be summoned, those trusted with information versus those kept to perimeter duty. One man in particular, a silver-haired figure introduced as Francesco Caldere, seemed to hold special authority. Francesco watched Lydia constantly, his cold gaze following her movements around the cabin. "A paramedic in the middle of nowhere," he remarked when they were briefly alone. "How fortunate for Dante that you found him before he froze to death." His words carried an unmistakable accusation that chilled Lydia more than the storm outside. "Are you suggesting I was involved in the attack?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Francesco's smile never reached his eyes. "I'm merely noting the remarkable coincidence. In our business, Ms. Hayes, coincidences often prove problematic." Whispered conversations stopped when Lydia entered rooms, men exchanging glances that spoke volumes. She began to realize her position was more precarious than she'd initially understood. To many of these men, she was either a potential conspirator or a witness to be silenced. Dante's condition deteriorated on the second night, infection raging through his system despite the antibiotics his men had flown in by helicopter. Lydia worked through the darkness, cooling his fevered skin, flushing the wound, administering intravenous medications with the focus that had always been her strength. "Don't trust Francesco," he mumbled during one feverish episode, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Watch him. He wants the old ways. He wants me gone." Lydia kept Dante's warning to herself, but began observing Francesco more carefully, noting how he questioned Dante's orders when he thought no one was listening, how he gathered certain men for private conversations away from the main group. The storm finally broke on the third day, sunlight glinting off the snow-covered landscape as communications were gradually restored. With cellular service patchy but functional, Dante ordered half his men to investigate the crash site and track down the would-be assassins. "You need a real hospital," Lydia insisted, as she checked his wounds that morning. "The infection is spreading, and I don't have the equipment to treat sepsis if it develops." Dante shook his head, though the movement clearly cost him. "Hospitals have too many entry points, too many potential compromises. I'm safer here with you." Something in the way he said it made her pause, the words carrying a weight beyond their surface meaning. For the first time, she saw something besides calculation in his eyes, something almost human, vulnerable. "Why me?" Lydia asked quietly, changing his bandages with practiced efficiency. "You have doctors on your payroll, men with far more experience treating gunshot wounds than a rural paramedic." Dante was silent for a moment, studying her face as if searching for something. "Because you had no reason to save me, yet you did. Because you looked at a man bleeding in the snow and saw a person worth saving, not an opportunity or a liability." Their conversation was interrupted by shouts from outside, Francesco's team returning from the crash site, dragging a bound and bloodied man between them. Lydia watched in horror from the window as they forced him to his knees in the snow, Francesco standing over him with cold determination. Dante struggled to his feet despite Lydia's protests, moving to the porch with one hand braced against the wall for support. "What is this?" he demanded, voice cutting through the chaos despite his weakened state. "We found your driver, hiding in a hunting cabin 5 miles from the crash," Francesco announced, a hint of triumph in his voice. "He's confessed to setting up the ambush, to working with our competitors." The accused man shook his head frantically, blood from a split lip spattering the pristine snow. "They tortured me to say that. Boss, I swear I had nothing to do with this. It was Francesco who changed the route. Francesco who dismissed half the security detail." Francesco drew his weapon in one fluid motion. "Lies from a desperate traitor. We have evidence of payments to his offshore account, phone records showing contact with the Hernandez family." Lydia saw the moment Dante understood, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the tension in his jaw as pieces fell into place. "Bring him inside," he ordered, his voice deceptively calm. "I want to question him personally." What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare as Dante, despite his physical weakness, methodically broke down Francesco's narrative. He questioned the driver gently, precisely, extracting details that contradicted the supposed evidence, revealing inconsistencies in Francesco's timeline. As Francesco grew increasingly agitated, Dante turned to his most trusted lieutenant. "Check Francesco's phone records for the past month. Compare them with our security protocols, route changes, schedule adjustments." The betrayal unfolded with terrible clarity. Francesco had been planning this coup for months, systematically removing loyal members from Dante's inner circle, making subtle changes to security procedures, building his own power base within the organization. "You were becoming weak," Francesco snarled when finally confronted, his careful facade cracking to reveal the ambition beneath. "Talking about going legitimate, about compromise, about peace with families we should be destroying, all because you're afraid of living up to your father's legacy." The standoff between Dante and Francesco escalated as loyal men drew weapons against Francesco's faction, the cabin transforming into a powder keg, ready to explode. Lydia found herself backed against the wall, a horrified witness to this dangerous power struggle. "Take him to the storage shed," Dante ordered, his voice dangerously soft. "Post guards, secure him, but do not harm him. Justice will be decided in Boston, not here." Francesco's eyes burned with hatred as two men escorted him out, his final words hanging in the air like poison. "This isn't over. You think your men are loyal? Half of them already answer to me." Night fell with an uneasy calm settling over the cabin. The remaining men split into clear factions, those still loyal to Dante, and those watching, waiting for Francesco's supporters to make their move. Lydia moved cautiously between them, treating injuries, checking Dante's wounds, feeling the tension build with every passing hour. Dante insisted on remaining in the main room despite his condition, a visible display of strength that cost him dearly in pain and exhaustion. "You're making yourself a target," Lydia whispered as she changed his IV, aware of the watching eyes. "If I hide, I'm already dead," he replied simply. "Fear can smell weakness like blood in water." The attack came at 2 a.m., a sudden explosion at the rear of the cabin that shook the entire structure, followed by gunfire from multiple directions. Francesco's men had rallied, freeing him and launching a coordinated assault while Dante was at his weakest. Lydia dove for cover as windows shattered inward, glass raining across the wooden floor while bullets splintered furniture. One of Dante's bodyguards fell beside her, a red bloom spreading across his chest. "We need to move now." Dante appeared at her side, remarkably steady despite his injuries, a pistol gripped in his hand. "The garage has a reinforced vehicle. Stay close to me." They moved through the chaos like dancers in a deadly ballet, Dante firing with precision despite his wounds, Lydia keeping low, helping a young guard who'd taken shrapnel to the leg, the air filled with smoke and the sharp crack of gunfire. The garage connected to her cabin through a mudroom, the space now filled with armed men firing at each other across overturned workbenches. Dante pulled Lydia behind a metal toolbox, his body shielding hers as bullets pinged off the surfaces around them. "On 3, we run for the Suburban. Don't stop, don't look back," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. 1, 2, 3. They sprinted across the exposed concrete, bullets tracking their movement, one grazing Dante's already wounded shoulder. He didn't slow, shoving Lydia into the passenger seat of an armored SUV before sliding behind the wheel. The Suburban crashed through the garage door in an explosion of wood and snow, fishtailing onto the access road as bullets peppered its reinforced rear window. Lydia glimpsed her cabin in the side mirror, flames already consuming the eastern wall, men fighting in the snow, a war zone that had once been her sanctuary. "I'm sorry," Dante said, his voice tight with pain as he navigated the treacherous road. "I never meant to bring this to your door." Blood seeped through his shirt, the exertion reopening his wounds, but he drove with unwavering focus. "There's a church about 15 miles north, abandoned since the 60s. We can regroup there." The stone chapel appeared like a ghost through swirling snow, its stained glass windows long gone, replaced with plywood that couldn't keep out the bitter cold. Dante parked the SUV behind the building, hidden from the road by overgrown pines. Inside, the abandoned church retained a strange dignity despite its decay. Pews covered in dust, a stone altar still standing, moonlight filtering through holes in the roof. Lydia helped Dante to a relatively intact bench, her paramedic training taking over as she assessed his reopened wounds. Francesco will have men watching the hospitals, the airports, every road out of the county, Dante said through gritted teeth as she stitched his shoulder by the light of a battery-powered lantern. But I still have people loyal to me. True loyalty. Not the kind bought with promises and threats. Lydia worked in silence, processing the surreal turn her life had taken. Why does Francesco hate you so much? This seems more personal than a simple power grab. Dante's laugh was hollow, echoing in the empty church. My father built our organization on fear, on brutal efficiency. Francesco was his right hand, his enforcer, the man who made problems disappear permanently. He winced as Lydia tightened a bandage, his next words careful, measured. When my father died, everyone expected me to continue his legacy. Instead, I started making changes, laundering our money through legitimate businesses, cutting ties with the more violent enterprises, seeking alliances instead of blood feuds. The night stretched into dawn as they talked, Dante revealing more of himself than perhaps he'd intended. The weight of inheriting a criminal empire at 23, the constant threat of betrayal, the impossible choices between power and conscience that had defined his life since. At first light, a soft knock at the church door sent them both scrambling for cover, Dante's weapon appearing in his hand despite his injuries. The door creaked open to reveal a young man, barely 20, dressed in tactical gear, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Julian, Dante breathed, lowering his gun. How did you find us? GPS tracker in the Suburban, boss, Julian replied, stepping inside. I've been trying to reach you. Francesco's telling everyone you're dead, that he's taking control of the organization. He's called a meeting of all the lieutenants for tonight. Lydia watched the subtle transformation as Dante absorbed this information, pain and exhaustion giving way to calculated resolve. Who's still loyal? Who can we trust? Julian's answer was immediate. The younger crews, the legitimate business managers, about 40% of the security teams. The old guard is mostly with Francesco, but they're wavering, waiting to see which way the wind blows. Dante nodded, already forming a plan. Contact everyone you can trust. Have them meet us at the old waterfront warehouse. Tell no one about Ms. Hayes. As far as anyone knows, I escaped the ambush alone. Boston's waterfront transformed into a fortress as Dante's loyal forces gathered, young men and women raised in the organization's new era, veterans who respected strength regardless of method, business managers who preferred Dante's vision of legitimacy to Francesco's old-world brutality. Lydia stood back, watching Dante command this unlikely army despite his injuries, his quiet authority drawing respect from hardened criminals and Ivy League business graduates alike. His plan was elegant in its simplicity, not a war, but a demonstration. Francesco believes power comes from fear, Dante explained to his assembled lieutenants. I'm going to show him. True power comes from loyalty freely given, from respect earned through actions, not threats. The meeting of the 5 families was scheduled for midnight at the Westlake building. Francesco presenting himself as the new head of the Blackwell organization, seeking recognition from the other major players in Boston's underworld. Security was tight, Francesco having doubled the usual protocols, but he'd made one critical oversight. He'd kept Dante's original security team intact, men who knew every entrance, every camera blind spot, every security override in the building. You should stay here, Dante told Lydia as his men prepared for the operation. You've already risked enough for a man you barely know, a man who's brought nothing but danger to your door. Lydia surprised herself with her answer, the words coming before she'd fully formed the thought. I pulled you from that wreck for a reason. I'd like to see this through, to know whether I saved a man worth saving. The Westlake building's conference room hushed as Dante walked through the doors, flanked by his loyal lieutenants, Lydia following a few steps behind. Francesco's face drained of color, his newfound authority evaporating in an instant as the 5 family heads rose in respect, not for him, but for the man he'd failed to kill. Gentlemen, Dante acknowledged the assembled crime lords with a nod. I believe there's been some confusion about the leadership of the Blackwell organization. Allow me to clarify. What followed wasn't the bloodbath Lydia had feared, but something far more powerful. Dante exposing Francesco's betrayal methodically, presenting evidence of his sabotage, his embezzlement, his secret deals with rival families. Not with rage, but with the calm precision of a prosecutor building an irrefutable case. The other family heads listened in silence, their expressions hardening as Francesco's treachery became clear, not just against Dante, but against protocols that had maintained peace between their organizations for generations. In the old days, his punishment would be simple, Dante concluded, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on the pale, sweating Francesco. A traitor's death, brutal and public. A message written in blood. The room held its collective breath, Francesco's men already stepping away from him, distancing themselves from his inevitable fate. Dante moved closer, his voice dropping so only those nearest could hear. But those days are over, at least in my organization. Dante turned to the assembled crime lords. Francesco will face justice, real justice through the legal system. His financial crimes alone will put him away for decades, without a single drop of blood spilled. Shocked murmurs rippled through the room at this unprecedented approach. One of the older family heads, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, leaned forward. You're changing the rules that have governed us for generations. Why should we accept this? Dante's answer was simple, powerful in its authenticity. Because violence breeds violence, vengeance breeds vengeance. Because I was dying in the snow when a woman who owed me nothing chose mercy over indifference. She showed me another way as possible. In the days that followed, Lydia watched a transformation unfold. Francesco's arrest on federal charges making headlines, Dante's organization restructuring with legitimate businesses at its forefront, the old ways giving way to something new, not perfect, not entirely clean, but evolving. What happens now? Lydia asked as they stood on the balcony of Dante's Boston penthouse. The city lights spread below them like fallen stars. You go back to being Dante Blackwell, reformed crime boss, and I return to Pinewood Memorial and pretend none of this ever happened? Dante turned to her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. Or you stay. Not as a hostage or a witness or an obligation, but because two people who never should have met somehow found something worth keeping in the middle of a snowstorm. The choice before her was impossible, illogical. Her quiet life as a paramedic against something dangerous and unknown with a man still walking the tightrope between two worlds. Yet when Dante reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. I saved your life, Lydia said softly. Maybe now you can show me how to really live mine. Thank you all for following this story to its conclusion. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support is what keeps these stories coming, and I couldn't continue creating them without you.